If you could see me now, the one who said that he'd rather go, one who said he'd rather be alone. You could only see me now. If I could hold you now, just for a moment, if I could really make you mine. Just for a while, turn back the hands of time. If I could only hold you now. I've been too long in the wind, too long in the rain, taking any comfort that I can. Looking back and longing for the freedom of my chain. Lying in your loving arms again. If you could hear me now, singing somewhere through the lonely night, dreaming of the arms that held me tight. But only hear me now. I've been too long in the wind, too long in the wind, taking any comfort that I can. Looking back and longing for the freedom of my chain. Lying in your loving arms again. I've been too long in the rain, too long in the rain, taking any comfort that I can. Looking back and longing for the freedom of my chain. Lying in your loving arms again. I can almost feel your loving arms again. I your loving arms again. Righty. So we'll keep it nice and easy for now, chilled. Anyways, my name is Lungelo. This is Devza on the drums. I forgot to introduce us. This is Devza on the drums, and yeah, gonna. Yeah, When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be. There will be an answer, let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be. Speaking words of wisdom, let it be. Cause I remember when we used to sing in the government yard in Trenchtown, observing the hypocrites. They would mingle with the good people. We made good friends we had, and good friends we lost along the way. In the great future, you cannot forget your past. So dry your tears and say, oh, I cry. Oh, mind of cry. I said, everything's gonna be alright. 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 Oh, everything's gonna be alright. No woman, no cry. No, 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 no. One heart together and be alright. Singing one one heart. Give thanks and praise to the Lord, and you will be alright. One heart together and be alright. Yeah. A little bit of Bob Marley. Because me myself have dreadlocks, it's always assumed that we're gonna play a reggae set, but as I always say, it's a hairstyle, not a lifestyle. But anyways, moving on. to sing. Oh, Jody, what shall we do? Sister, what shall we do? Oh, Jody, shall we do? Sister, what shall we do? Swino Rosa say, Kuchengetaro Fumoko, and we now, Uchachiwana. Swino Rosa say, Kuretaro Fumoko, and we now, Uchachiwana. Paswa Baba Tapamuri Pasinara, and we now, Uchachiwana. Paswa Badumuka Pamuri Pasinara, and Uchachiwana. Oh, to this, what shall we do to that is? What shall we do? Yeah, to this, what shall we do to that is? What shall we do? That's what we go. Kunamuna Matovaru, and very far. Only by myself, and now we now go. Without you, that's the go. Kunamuna Matovaru, and very far. Only by myself, and now we now go. Without you, that's the go. Kunamuna Matovaru, and very far. Only by myself, and now we now go. Without you, oh, what shall we do to say to God? What shall we do? Yeah, what shall we do to say to God? What shall we do? Oh, so this is it. What shall we do to say to God? What shall we do? Yeah, so this is it. What shall we do to say to God? What shall we do? Thank you very much.
Hello, hello. Good evening. Hello. Can someone call the stragglers from outside? Good evening. Thank you. Sorry. Right. Oh wait, have our AU fellows arrived? Our AU fellows. Okay, we're going to begin, even though we're waiting for a group of AU fellows to arrive, and I wanted to recognize them specifically, but I see they're definitely not here yet. So I'm going to stall for time just a wee bit, but I hope you've all got drinks and things. And remember, this evening at the end of it, there's a lovely meal, so please don't just run away. So I'm William Bird, and I run Media Monitoring Africa. Welcome to evening 2 of the Media Freedom Festival. Applause. We're very thankful to our supporters and partners this evening, in no particular order, them being the SABC, the South African Broadcasters, Broadcasting Corporation, the German Embassy, and of course our friends from the Media Development Diversity Agency. I don't see any of our friends from there this evening just yet, but I'm sure they're here. They've made this festival possible, so thank you very much. Oh, we do have a gentleman. Hello, good evening, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. So, you're not talking to me. Okay, excellent. So this evening we are gathered to start to look at some of the issues around online harms. And we're also quite excited because next week is something really cool, which is the IEC are going to be having their official election launch. It's the 24th of October. The IEC is having their official election launch. So we're very excited because this evening we are launching some of our tools to make sure that we are ready for when the IEC launches the elections. So what I'm going to do is in a short while, I'm going to start to do a bit of a demonstration of some of those tools. But I think I want to just impress on all of us the importance of this. Willa, are we able to show the president's commiseration with France? Thank you. Sorry, we're very informal here. Okay, so Willa is going to show you a video that was broadcast on Monday on TikTok. And it's a very cool video. Our presidency is moving into the next century, and they've started a TikTok account. And you're going to see this in just a moment, as soon as Willa manages to get it up. Okay. So we focused on online harms in the run-up to elections, precisely because we've seen in countries around the world the potential threats that these pose to democracies and democratic states. We've seen an absolute deluge of mis and disinformation in the Middle East conflict over the last few weeks. We've seen journalists being killed. All of these things destabilize and undermine not just the rights of the people there, but they undermine fundamentally our democratic ideals here. What we're seeing with the developments in AI, some of which are very good, but some of which are clearly threats to our democratic state, is that, and the ability of people to create mis and disinformation is becoming easier and easier, which means that one of the few places you're going to be able to rely on accurate, credible information is going to be from credible, reliable media houses. That's one of the reasons why the SABC has to succeed. At the moment, we know our government is happily, actively defunding the public broadcaster, presumably to keep it in a state of crisis. But this is a threat to our democratic state, make no error. We've seen in countries around the world that where you have higher levels of trust, you also have a highly functioning public broadcaster. So we can't underemphasize the critical importance of the public broadcaster, which reminds me of the fabulous support we've been receiving from our friends at SOS Coalition. Okay, well, I'll show them the lovely video. There's no audio. We need audio. Okay, hold on a moment.
How do we do that?
Right, no? Can you give Willa a mic over there? Okay, we've got probably one of the most astute TikTok consumers at this table. But I can tell you, if you just look at the video where it's actually really difficult for most people. If you're just browsing as you would on TikTok and you're flipping through, the likelihood of you potentially believing that is actually quite high. Now imagine this scenario that we get to somewhere a few weeks before elections, and some of the political parties, as they want to do, like to celebrate and push the xenophobia line. And for some reason or other, xenophobic violence breaks out. You then start to get a number of accounts putting out images of violence that are allegedly happening in downtown parts of A, B, C, D, E cities. They've got footage of it from 2021, right? So they can easily take that, manipulate it, and show it quickly to be, this is what's happening downtown now. You then get the president coming on air, making an announcement, as he may well, and talking about and saying, we're going to declare a state of emergency. And you're not allowed out of your house between this time or that time. Now, there's nothing to stop someone from doing that, right? So what's the line of defense against that? The line of defense against that is the media, the credible media. And it's some of the things that we're going to talk about now. Here are friends from the AU. Good evening. The chairs around, please. I'll let you take your seats, but whether we can start to bring up the stuff. I did. I had a green bottle, but it got mysteriously removed. Okay, good evening to our special guests from the AU. You're very, very welcome. I believe that you are from a range of countries. So we welcome guests this evening from Algeria, from the Gabon, from Kenya, from Ethiopia, from Zimbabwe. You're very welcome. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. I'm just letting everyone get seated. Good evening, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for being with us this evening. My name is William Bird. I'm the Director of Media Monitoring Africa. And in a short while, I'll sit down and let some really lovely, excellent people take the stage. But before we do that, I said we were very excited because this evening we are actually launching not one, not two, but 3 tools. We're multi-tool players, some of you might say. Okay, well, bring up our tool. So the first tool that we're going to demonstrate in short, briefly, is something called Mars. So we've seen an increase in the attacks against journalists over the last few years in South Africa, I mean, around the world. We've seen journalists' lives in the Middle East conflict being more than 15 losing their lives. One of the most common things that occurs at the moment is that on social media, our journalists are routinely attacked and harassed and threatened. So I'm just waiting for my web driver to find a seat. So in response to that, we've built a tool called Mars, which stands for Media Attack Report System. And what this aims to do is it allows reporters to upload attacks that they've experienced or been subjected to online. And this is important for a number of reasons, because frequently what happens with journalists is that they get attacked and they find their own ways of dealing with these attacks. They may either push them to the side, they may seek psychological support, which many of them need, or they may, in some rare instances, take people to court. But what we don't see is a concerted effort to start to build evidence for these things. In chatting with the colleagues at Meta, one of the issues that they've raised with us directly is to say, we hear these attacks against journalists, but we don't see enough evidence. There's no archived evidence of this, so we can't act. And when we ask our engineers, they say, where's the evidence? So Mars is the response to that. Mars aims to help us build a public repository of attacks against journalists, also to give the public a sense of the kind of crap that these journalists are forced to go through. The levels of abuse are often just horrific. But in building this, we realized that there was something else we could do. So we decided that one of the ways that we wanted to deal with this was to do something positive in response, right? Because as a journalist that gets attacked, they've got a few options. They can block the person that's attacking them. They can report them to the platform and hope that something happens, and nothing, almost nothing certainly does. In rare instances, they can take them to court. But that's expensive, and it usually results in an even bigger backlash against the journalist, right? So we were looking at this and thinking about it, and we said, what about if instead of responding to the trolls and the scumbags with scum and with vile, that we respond to them with love and excessive kindness? In other words, you kill them with kindness. You show them compassion. When they show you vile and horror, you show them love and pictures of pandas. We haven't built the panda element into it yet, but that's what caused us to build panda attacks. So in just a few weeks, we'll be having a workshop for people to volunteer to be pandas. And what that means is that you can get an anonymous identity as a panda, and that when you see an attack against a journalist, you can then click on, and in a few clicks using some clever AI, it'll generate an extremely kind and loving and delightful response. And you'll then be able to post that to the attackers. And the moment we can get a big group of pandas to go after these scumbags, we'll drown them out with silence. So that's Mars. Let's go on to the next one. Here's Padre. So one of the big things, Europe caught onto this a little bit late because we started it in 2019. Just this year in February, Europe announced that they're going to be having a Europe-wide political ad repository. We started this in 2019 in order to start to get a sense of what kind of content political parties were advertising. Thanks to some inputs and helping us find some lovely documents by Isaac Minard over there, the African Principles on Access to Information in an Election Period, which has an even more horrific acronym than the name of the document, provided guidance and said that we needed to be able to build an ad repository. So we used that as the hook, and we built an ad repository. And what this is it's a means of encouraging political parties to upload their political adverts to this repository. They want to do that for a number of reasons. One, they spend a lot of money on these things, and two, it's very difficult if you see an advert at the moment to know if it's actually a real advert or not. Often our political parties say such ridiculous things that you might actually believe them. So how on earth would you know? Well, one of the ways you'd know is you go to the Padre and you'd see. And this is important not just as an archive and repository, it's important so that if the IEC gets a complaint and people say, this person defaced our advert, the IEC can say, well, how do we know what the original looked like? And it'll be there on Padre, and then the IEC's got something that's measured, that's put up by the political party to assess. Now, this evening, one of our fabulous panelists is from IFEX, and one of the things that they've been starting to do is look at social media ad spend, because of course that's another indicator of how political parties seek to gain influence across social media platforms. So in response to that, we've started to build and started to scrape the APIs from the Meta and the Google political ad databases. So on Padre Now Live, you'll see that if you go there, you can start to see the beginnings of data that we're pulling from those various ad databases. So you can get a sense of which, okay, there the adverts are, that's not very sexy. Can you click on the sexy graph part, Willa? And let's hope and pray that it works. This is the live demo, and things very rarely work in live demos. That as you scroll down, you can start to see the political party ad spend, and this is for Facebook, is it? Yeah. So this is for Meta platforms, and if you just keep going, lines on the screen, there you go. So if you click on those lines, all of the political parties are there, and you can click them, and you can start to get a sense of who's advertising. Now, if you keep scrolling down, you'll start to see the ones from Google. And there's something very interesting about the Google ad trends, which is that there's only one party that's there at the moment, and that's the DA. And that's not because we have a DA bias. It's because the only political party that is currently within Google's API is the Democratic Alliance. They're ahead of the game. So there you go. We'll be adding new graphs to that in the next couple of weeks, but it's there as a public resource. People can go there, look at it. You can view the original source of the ad. You can click through directly to the Google original site for it, or to the Meta original site. So we're not hiding anything there. The figures we're showing are going to be averages, because they provide a baseline and an upper limit for ad spend. So we've got to kind of guesstimate these things. But that's what we're aiming to do with the political ad and social media campaign repository. So we think that's pretty cool. And now our flagship thing, which is what we're so thrilled and proud to be doing with the IEC again, is Real 411. And what Real 411 is it's a public complaints platform. And this is important for a few reasons, because what social media platforms will tell you is that if you see something that you think is dodgy on a political, on their platform, they'll tell you that you can report it. And sometimes you can. You can't actually report this information on many of them, right? But if you can, what happens to it is it disappears into their system. If you report it on Facebook, it goes into Facebook system, gets adjudicated somewhere. Could be Ireland, it could be North America, it could be somewhere in our continent, perhaps. It gets adjudicated according to their rules, their community principles, guidelines, and it comes back. And if you're lucky, it gets taken down, and if not, it doesn't. Very seldom do you get any reasoning beyond it reached our community guidelines. Now, there's something profoundly unfair about that, which is why we built Real 411. Precisely because what Real 411 does is it says, these are our elections. We need to adjudicate them according to our constitution and our human rights principles. If any media in South Africa steps out of line in a way that is not acceptable, they can be reported to the IEC or to the BCCSA or the CCC or the Press Council, and they will deal with them, right? The IEC has significant powers in an election period to deal with these things, as they should. The one exception to that, of course, has been social media companies. So the first reason we built it is so that it allows anyone in South Africa to report something, and it goes through a public process. It's completely independent. Every complaint gets reviewed by a minimum of 4 people, 3 experts and a legal secretariat. And then it goes to the IEC for them to review and to decide what action they may wish to take on that particular complaint. You're kept informed as it goes through the process and their reasons. And if for some reason you aren't happy, there's an appeal process where we have a former constitutional court judge as the appeal judge on that process. The second and perhaps more critical reason that Real 411 is also really special is that it applies the same standard. So you don't have to know how to complain on Meta, how to complain on Facebook, how to do it there. You can complain once very easily and quickly on Real 411. Well, I go to the complaints button, please. To submit a complaint, it's very easy. What you can do is sign in which case you don't have to enter your personal details all the time. These details, just by the way, are kept secluded in a way that no one else has access to them. I don't have access to them as the director of MMA. It's only as a security assurance for the IEC to make sure that if something were to advance to a developed stage, that they could potentially get in touch with that person if they needed to. But otherwise, that information is kept locked away on very secure servers. So you enter your name and your email and a number, and then you say what you want to complain about. If you want to know the criteria against which these things are being judged, there's a little button next to each of the criteria, and you click on it and it tells you this is the basis on which these things are being judged against. You fill in your reasons, and it can be as many as you like. You say where it came from, and you hit submit, and hey presto, it goes through. If we get an urgent complaint, in other words, if we get something where we see that this has the likelihood or potential to cause real public harm, it gets marked as an urgent by the reviewer, and we then get a team to jump on it immediately. Our record is getting a complaint from when it's reported out and through the system entirely in 45 minutes, which is faster than any social media company can deal with these things. And the best of it is that this is all locally built. Behind this, there's a massive system that sits there. Thanks to our friends at Exonic who built these things for us. When they all work properly and appropriately, we're most thrilled and delighted. And then just as I wrap up, there's also an app which Willa will show you the advert for. And in fact, here's the Scan Me code, the QR code. There's an app on your phone, which means that when you want to report from your mobile device, you go to, if you're on your Twitter, on your Meta or whatever, you click share to, and it'll say where to, and one of those options will be Real 411. You click report and it brings in a link for you, and you just take a screen grab and you plonk it there and you report, which means that you can report these things in 60 seconds. So what we're hoping to achieve through this is make some small contribution to making our elections free, fair, and credible. So with that and those demonstrations, I'm now going to call on someone that I suspect you'll all know and recognize, either from listening to his voice in the mornings as you drive through our traffic and curse the potholes, or you will see him smiling at us on television. We're very thrilled and delighted to have this evening facilitating our discussion. Mr. Stephen Curtis, over to you.
Thank you, William. I think we're going to be sitting at these chairs and tables. It's not just me, by the way. Good evening. I am Stephen Curtis. I should probably start by saying hello to William. I suspect that I should probably say hello to the Chief Operating Officer of the SABC, because he sometimes makes me feel curiously defunded at the end of the month. That's a joke in Plaatjies. Before I get fired from one of my other jobs, hi Ahmed, how are you? Thank you very much indeed for coming tonight, and I really do appreciate you all coming. And I am going to go and sit over there once I find a wireless microphone. In fact, I'm just going to steal Simon Mabolo's wireless microphone. Really? It wasn't on at all? Thanks for telling me. I really appreciate it. This is a lovely audience. You've been great so far. I sometimes wonder, as I was saying, if in particular X or Twitter or X are still as influential as they used to be. Anyway, you probably know most of our guests tonight. Simon Mabolo is the CEO of the Electoral Commission. He carries the incredibly important title of Chief Electoral Officer. And Si, I sometimes wonder if you'd rather be than have the job of Chief Electoral Officer. Lisa Reppel is joining us, I believe, online. Lisa, good evening. She is a specialist in global social media and disinformation. Nomshado Nkosunkulu is a communication monitoring Africa. And Jean Leroux does the, I think, impossible job of working out what is disinformation and who is doing it and where it's coming from at the DFR lab. And we'll start by inviting each of you to make a few comments, and we'll move on from there. So Simon Mabolo, perhaps I could start with you and ask really if it's possible to know what kind of influence these online harms have, and if you as the IEC actually have an obligation and duty to stop it.
Let's say this, that a few years ago, you just, as an election administrator, you just needed to ensure that you have well-trained staff who are deployed at voting stations. You had good logistics management, and that voting stations were there. If you did that and counted the ballot papers well and recorded them well, that was enough. You had a decent election. but that is no longer enough. Because with the evolving, ever-evolving information ecosystem, you are no longer guaranteed a credible process by merely getting the basic elements of an election involved. Any election administrator will tell you that the biggest nightmare is not so much whether the ballot paper is printed in enough quantity, whether the staff performs that. Okay, that's fine. And whether the staff performs their duty accurately. The biggest nightmare in today's world, election world, is the ability of disinformation to derail an election. In fact, it is the ability of disinformation to impair the credibility of the process. Now, can we do something? Or perhaps Stephen, is it within our statutory purview to do something about it? Certainly yes, because the Constitution demands of us to ensure that there's a free and fair election. And in that you can read a credible election. So we've got to put in place measures that at least tries to ameliorate the difficulties presented by disinformation. I don't think any election administrator can ever say we will be in a position to totally eradicate disinformation. But we've got to put in place measures that deals with disinformation and ensure that the percentage or the modicum of disinformation that happens in society is not so big that it, on a balance, impairs the credibility of the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon Mabolo, the Chief Electoral Officer, and I must say that does make a lot of sense. Lisa Reppel, I'm going to invite you. You're joining us online to make a few comments, and I know you've been looking at the global picture as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all this evening. As you mentioned in the opening, I work for a global organization that supports local partners around the world in the democracy and elections. And I've been a big fan of Media Monitoring Africa's work since I first started talking with William and team members in 2018 on this broader issue set of online harms, misinformation and disinformation. And that conversation has really been critical to a global initiative that we've been working on, a community of practice around online campaigning transparency. And it's a topic that we've been hearing from all of our partners, this question of how do you bring greater transparency and accountability to what's happening in online spaces and online campaigning more specifically. And for a lot of oversight institutions, election commissions, anti-corruption bodies, this is an extension of a type of mandate that already exists to oversee what are the rules of the road for domestic political campaigning. But when it comes to extending to what does that mean in practice in online spaces, it presents a whole host of challenges, which I imagine we'll get into further in the panel. But I think it is important when we look at this broader issue set of misinformation, disinformation, to start looking at the discrete interventions and discrete levers where we can start to have an impact in mitigating some of the most egregious harms. And there, of course, is no silver bullet, but I think if we start breaking this broader issue set down into its component challenges, you can start to make meaningful impacts. And I think online campaigning is a space where we are starting to see that happening. Of course, online campaigning in and of itself is not a harm. There are lots of democratic goods, particularly access for smaller and less well-funded parties and candidates to be able to reach voters via social media. But when this is done in an environment where there's a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, it really can be a space in which you have unfettered spending, where you have a lack of transparency about how political parties are targeting different voters, about the specific messages that are being used, and that to the degree we can both think about what's the regulatory framework that makes sense, and also what type of regulatory framework is actually enforceable. There's a lot of innovation that's happening at the national level where there's a lot of experience to be exchanged and learned. And the last point I'll make is just to emphasize that outside of the regulatory and oversight component of online campaigning, that the role of civil society and sort of third-party watchdogs is incredibly important in this space. It was great, William, to see the updates to Padre and some of the visualizations that are happening with the online campaigning data. It's initiatives like that that take some of these data sources that we have from the online platforms and present them in a way that is publicly accessible, visually and able to interpret that information, that really connects the dots between when we do have data, how do we bring that knowledge to regulators' attention, to the public's attention in a way that does allow for that greater transparency and accountability. So I'll stop there and looking forward to the discussion.
Counter this.
All right. So the power of information during elections, I think, is undeniable. And it can either, I mean, it acts both as a catalyst in the sense that it's there to empower citizens to make informed decisions. However, the same tool can be used for disruption. And what the digital realm has done has allowed a huge amount of information to flow, right? At the same time, it can empower citizens, right, to understand the voting process, the electoral processes, etc., and also understand the various candidates and their messaging. However, the very same information that we're interacting with can actually be manipulated, right? So tactics has now even evolved as technology becomes more sophisticated. And the big question now comes, where do citizens go to get credible information? And as Media Monitoring Africa, we've always stood at the point that media plays a crucial role during elections in terms of ensuring that citizens are getting credible information, accurate information, and balanced and transparent information. And it goes about the same way that they also consume and get news agendas from the very same platform that disinformation is thriving in. And it goes back to how a newsroom interacting and developing and ending up, creating information and news stories for citizens to consume. What sources are they using? Are there fact-checking mechanisms within the newsrooms that ensures that citizens are getting credible information? Are they themselves holding themselves to account, rather, in the way that we're ensuring that there's no bias during elections? And I think over the years, we've started seeing the trend that those in power are using media as a scapegoat to say that, but you are obviously going left, or you support the left or the right. And at the same time, it goes about how disinformation affects or has an impact on trust when it comes to institutions and can easily influence that and public opinion. And then obviously us sitting here, we have a huge issue of the digital divide, whereby information or the access to information that we're getting here is not the same continentally. So now we actually also have an issue where disinformation is trickling to offline networks. And that is a whole different discussion that we can have later on. But it goes back to how media is at the center of credible information and how over the years, in terms of building that credibility, I mean, I always highlight that you'd rather be last and correct and first and wrong, because people always remember the wrong. And at the same time, your credibility is your currency as a journalist. People remember you with accurate information. I think I'll stop there for now.
I wonder, if I'm just getting a little old in years, when I wonder if people have a sense of shame. I mean, Donald Trump has no sense of shame. And I think I would say the same is probably true of people who call themselves journalists at Fox News. There's no sense of shame. And I think you have that in South Africa too. Point fingers after the second green bottle that William will give me later. Jean Leroux, you spend a lot of your time trying to work out who's in charge of this disinformation. You do a lot of good work at the DFR lab. You've just been overseas at one of these big conferences. What kind of trends are you seeing?
Yeah, I think, Stephen, one of the big things. Hello, there we go. I think one of the interesting things and I can hear the same trend through all of the speakers that preceded me now as well, is the way that things are changing. I kind of cut my teeth in the disinformation space with the Gupta bots back in 2016. And what's so interesting now is to see how much things have changed since then. It's become a lot harder to find these networks. It's become a lot more difficult to determine who's funding them, who's behind it, what the objectives are. And tools and things that's now become available to individuals trying to manipulate discussions, manipulate elections, manipulate the way people think, behave, and act. It's just becoming clear that we've got an uphill battle. And the battle is not just for us as disinformation researchers. It's not just for journalists. It's not just for civil society. It's much broader than that. It's basically the entire media consuming public that's kind of at the face of this. Some of the big trends that's coming along now is the use of especially generative AI in these campaigns. It's not so much the fact that it's being used to manipulate or to deceive, but the fact that the volume of content that generative AI makes possible to put out just dwarfs anything that a newsroom can fact check within a certain amount of time. They can put out a number of images or audio clips, to such an extent that it'll take a newsroom, a day or two to verify whether this clip was actually said or not. You all of you would have seen this clip from the president earlier today. To fact check something like that, a journalist would need to reach out to the presidency. They need to look through the video itself to determine whether there's any clues in the video that they can ascertain whether it's false or not. And all of that takes time, it takes expertise. And by the time they've done that, there's 3 or 4 of those videos out that they need to do the same with. It becomes almost this trying to catch up with a runaway train at the end of the day.
So it's a flood, or to use a more political term, it's a bit of a tsunami. You just can't stop it.
It's one of those things that there's a different term that I'd like to use for it. I can't in present company use the exact meteorological term for that, but it's definitely a big issue, and especially as we're coming up to the elections. I think one of the big things that disinformation does is erode trust in institutions. The media has for long been a target of that, but you're also seeing things like the IEC, where that trust in an institution, a Chapter 9 organization, meant to set up and meant to run our elections. If trust in that is eroded, then it means we've lost trust in the electoral process itself.
Lisa, I want to put this question to you first, and then I'll ask everybody else. One of the problems that I have with all of this is trying to assess what the impact of disinformation is. And there are a couple of things I think we can say straight off. People wouldn't do it if it didn't work. So it must work, right? Or they didn't think it would work. The second thing is that there might have been a time, maybe not very long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, where you would have been able to say, this media organization supported this party, this is how this party did, this is the audience of this media organization, was the public broadcaster in whatever country neutral or not, or non-aligned or whatever it was, how did that happen, right? When Twitter and X and Facebook started, you might have been able to even say, this was the amount of disinformation we picked up. Now with WhatsApp and the amount of nonsense, and I'm being incredibly polite, the amount of nonsense that moves through WhatsApp groups with end-to-end encryption, where someone will, and we probably all have a relative who will say, is this true? It must be true. My friend sent it to me. What now? So Lisa, I wonder if it's got to a point where it's impossible to assess the impact of this. And that's perhaps what scares me the most.
I think that's a question we're all debating. I think that we all intuitively feel that something is shifted and the train has come off the rails. But I think when we start to try and parse out how much of this is a technology problem, can we point at social media and say, this is 100% of the issue and therefore 100% of the solutions have to come from this technology as well? I think that can be a a limiting mindset when we think about the types of solutions that might be available to us. When we look at the types of disinformation campaigns and intentional disinformation that gain particular traction, often they are speaking to and amplifying grievances that already exist. They're speaking to a moment where technology is both facilitating the spread of these narratives, but also creating a lot of the sense of change, fear, that creates really fertile ground for narratives to land. And I often think, in the way that my role has evolved in the last 5 or 6 years of thinking about disinformation and online disinformation that the set of solutions we need to reach for is not just what can social media platforms do to mitigate these harms, but how are we creating compelling narratives about the value of our democratic institutions in ways that actually resonate and are much less abstract than the value of our democratic institutions, thinking that that is a narrative that can speak for itself. So I guess a little bit of everything, but I'll throw it to my other panelists. I'm curious what others think on this topic.
And I mean, Nomshado, for example, in the past, if you saw something that wasn't true on Twitter, formal media might be able to counter that. But if it's going around on WhatsApp, no one knows. It doesn't reach your notice, you know, and you also, no one knows how many people have actually seen it.
I think it goes back to emphasizing the impact of disinformation offline. And I always relate to this because what we see is WhatsApp is, I mean, this is a platform where you are interacting with people that you want to, your friends, your family, individuals that you trust. And to come in between that, I think we saw it during COVID-19 when we're trying to combat certain narratives. It was so difficult. And it emphasized how disinformation is actually an intersectional threat, where even through these platforms such as WhatsApp, it can easily incite violence, it can easily amplify hate crimes, it can also easily discriminate. And the difficulty of coming in between such platforms, it's not like Twitter and Facebook. It's you having to personally say to a relative that this is not true. However, for an individual to get to that point, it means they need to be empowered with the literacy to understand the information that they're engaging with. So it goes back to number one, the ensuring that we are empowering citizens with digital literacy skills, which I think should be the first thing that we should be doing. Second to that, in fostering critical thinking, that not everything that we see online should be taken as face value. I think I'll stop there.
I think they agree with you. I think that's right. I think I've got that right. So we talked about a moment ago the obligations of institutions, and I wondered if one of them was, there's certain things, I mean, I must just warn you that I've known Simon Mabolo for years and years and years, when we were both based in Gauteng. And one of the things that I will know, for example, is I know to an extent what Simon Mabolo says and does. I know how Cyril Ramaphosa speaks. I know how Jacob Zuma speaks, for example. So when you see something that doesn't seem right, it's not just that the sync is off from the video, it's also based on their previous behavior. And what that takes me to is there now more than ever a really tough obligation, a tough duty on institutions, media, electoral commissions, to behave in a particular way so that when someone puts out a video of disinformation, you know instinctively that's not right.
Well, I think a few issues. The officials, especially officials in public institutions, need to conduct themselves and articulate matters in a manner that reinforces the values of the Constitution. Almost to a point where one cannot distinguish one's private capacity from the public persona, because only once you reach that level of public maturity would it engender confidence in Stephen to say, but I can never say something like this. You can only reach that if a person really lives the values of the Constitution. But Secondly, you see, it's very difficult to quantify the impact of disinformation, especially on an outcome of an election. Very difficult. But what it certainly does is to damage a public good, public goods. Certainly the credibility of the commission, very easy to damage through social media. But you see, you can, commissioners are dispensable. You know, chief electoral officer is dispensable. The much more critical damage is damage to the electoral process. Because once a person loses faith in the fact that I can go and vote and I know that my vote will be correctly recorded and it will be part of an outcome of an election, it's very difficult in the next 5 years to take that person into a ballot booth. Once a person loses confidence in the process, it's going to be difficult to get them back there in the next 5 years. And digital disinformation destroys that. It's a permanent damage that it does to citizens of the country.
And I would imagine it requires all institutions. So it's not just the Electoral Commission that needs to live up to the Constitution. It would be all of the other institutions, including to an extent the politicians. I mean, it's easy to say that Donald Trump is an American problem. It's not. It's an all of us problem. I mean, would that be right? It requires everyone to sort of do the right thing. That makes disinformation much harder.
Certainly, and you know, part of the problem with the quality of our democratic experience is that the political leadership is such that the need to secure 10 votes is often prioritized above the need to maintain good governance. You know, if I was a politician, to get 10 more votes from the audience here, I'll say things that in fact have a permanent damage on our public goods, including maintaining the credibility of the electoral process. We need to reach to a level of maturity that says, you know, I'll stand for the right things for our society, even if it means losing 20 votes from this audience. But it takes great maturity. And as a society, we're not there yet.
Jean, I made the point a moment ago that deliberate disinformation can stop someone voting, you know, forever, reduces their trust forever. And that's quite something, because that means that someone almost for free can actually remove a voter. I mean, which is a huge impact over time, and almost free do it to millions of voters. Are there any ways of, any sort of clever digital forensic ways of countering this, or are we already kind of just too far behind? I mean, is this one of those classic things where the people trying to stop something just have, you know, the baddies have such a head start?
Yeah, I think the question there and the solution to that ties in with the solutions mentioned by the previous panelists. It's not a technological problem in of itself. Technology is part of the problem, but in order to counter that, you need to counter it as a society. That's where programs such as digital literacy, not just media literacy, but digital literacy is so important, because you need the users of these media to be able to discern whether a account is true or false. Is this account that was created a week ago, you know, 2 weeks before the election? Should you be trusting that for election information? To give an example from the Kenyan elections from last year, in one specific ward, there were rumors circulated that there was a leopard on the loose. And as a result of that, people didn't go and vote. So there's a swath of people who didn't get their votes counted. They didn't have their voice heard because there were rumors circulating that there was a leopard on the loose. They shouldn't be queuing. They shouldn't be going outside, as a matter of fact. Now, if you manage to target that to a specific ward, you know there's a specific stronghold that's a DA stronghold or an EFF stronghold, or this is a stronghold where the ANC is very closely contested with the IFP, and you use something like that and you manage to target that to the followers or the supporters of that party, it's a way for you to gain a small edge at the end of the day. And the repercussions of that is much broader because, as you mentioned now, once people start losing faith in the democratic process, they stop participating. And trying to reinstill that trust and that faith and that level or that feeling of agency in the process is something that's very difficult. You don't do that overnight. You don't do that with social media posts. That's a longer term societal effort that we need to do. And my personal view is, starting young, starting at school level already, getting digital literacy involved, getting people who use these platforms, who are exposed to these platforms, aware of what's actually going on and what some of the risks and dangers are.
I'm going to come in a little bit to the sort of issue around inoculation, vaccination of, how we actually, do that. Lisa, sometimes I wonder, is there a political campaign that can be waged against disinformation in some way? There was great sort of social media experiment, I think, in the US a while ago, how they were able to divide people by whether they liked pineapple on their pizza or not. And it's a sort of classic case of forcing people to make a binary decision out of a false binary, But is there some sort of way that we can make people think again, long before elections, to make them understand exactly what's at stake and what they need to prepare for in terms of disinformation?
I think we've seen a wave of initiatives that have attempted to do exactly that globally, and it's taken a lot of different forms. Some of the countries that have the greatest success rate at resilience to misinformation and disinformation, that it comes down to education systems and the types of critical thinking, media literacy, digital literacy that are baked in from the very beginning. But when we start to think about reactive approaches, or what do we do when sort of things have already started to go downhill, I think the fire hose of bad information is always available. And I think we sometimes take for granted that the fire hose of good information can't hold sway. And I think there's a lot of reasons why we're good to be skeptical about that. Disinformation is emotionally salient and faster and easier to produce. But we've seen really interesting examples from Brazil, for example, as a country where I've worked recently, where there were very concerted efforts to sort of strategically anticipate the types of weaknesses and risks to the election process that were likely to surface. And then a lot of really smart, digitally native content sort of introducing pills of democracy or pills of truth. I think they called it something like this, where it was this whole social media campaign, a real whole of society approach that worked not only with civil society and academia, but worked with football clubs and pop entertainers, that was cross-platform in terms of how they're reaching out to voters. And that increasingly I'm seeing some election commissions adopting this language of almost like reputation management or brand management, that it's taking a page out of the book of sort of the private sector of how do you instill trust in your brand, the brand of the election commission itself. And as sometimes that mentality can feel a bit too sort of private sector or a bit uncomfortable, but I think there are lessons that can be taken that we should be adopting from other sectors as well. So a few thoughts.
No, Michelle, I mean, we would need a huge sort of social effort to make that work here, wouldn't we? We need to follow those. We're very similar to Brazil as a country, actually. But we would need a huge social effort. We can't just leave it to Media Monitoring Africa or the SABC or the Electoral Commission even working together. That's probably not enough.
I think the emphasis has always been on the need for collaboration, and how when we're thinking of solutions, it's not a one-man job. You can't, expect, for example, government or media or civil society to be the only ones pushing the agenda of we are dealing with this situation. And I think we've seen that in other countries, how when one stakeholder or institution has such power, then we start dealing with issues of censorship. We start dealing with issues of internet shutdowns. And I think it goes back to, at the basis of this, disinformation is literally a threat towards our democracy, and a human rights approach is symbolism towards why are we actually ensuring that we've got the right mechanisms to combat this. And it always goes back to also looking at how we've always said It's the tech companies who need to do something. It's the tech companies who need to ensure. And we brought, I think, the issue of localization, right? We can't expect tech companies to understand, and we actually require them, but at the same time, the community guidelines don't even understand in South Africa, what is the definition of hate speech in comparison to Ghana, for example. And when an individual submits a complaint with the confidence that this platform will deal with it and only get a response months later or weeks later when the damage has already been done, goes away with the reason why the process is there in the first place. Even worse for them to come back and say, that is not disinformation or that is not hate speech, for example. So I think we need to, number one, bring the tech companies as well to the table. And I think that's what happened when MMA and the IEC brought the tech companies to the table, because we understood that in order for us to deal with this in a fast, process or way, we need to ensure that the correct stakeholders are at the table. And I like that you mentioned political parties, because this is also their moment, right? And they're very robust when it comes to campaigning. But once you start saying you also are accountable at the same time, because it's your content that's being manipulated. I can easily take a narrative or a content from their campaigns, manipulate it to say something completely different. So it goes also to say, what are they doing with their power? Are they ensuring that they're telling their supporters at the same time that there's this called disinformation? It looks like this. Please go to platforms such as Padre to ensure that you're interacting with credible information.
It's very interesting to think about it all, because and John, I'm going to put this question to you. Normally in a society, you know, when you grow up, from the moment we're very young, one of the things that works to stop bad behavior is deterrence. You know, if you do something stupid, you're going to hurt yourself. Your parents explain this to you, you learn that eventually. And that's what societies do too, is they use certain things as a deterrent. It seems to me, and in politics, for example, you'll see a political person stand up and say something that they get punished for by voters. And one example that comes to mind for some reason is Julius Malema and the EFF saying that they weren't going to celebrate the Springboks winning the World Cup the last time. I don't know if they've learned their lesson and they will do it this time, but they faced a backlash for that. And John, it seems to me that what disinformation does never actually talks in the positive way. It's never a politician saying X, Y, and Z. It's always against someone else. And so that means that there's no deterrent, because you're never going to find out who's responsible. If there was one great crystal clear case that could show this party was responsible for this dangerous disinformation, and as a result, they were punished, not just legally, but politically by voters, they probably wouldn't do it. But from what I can see, that's never going to happen. And that's what's missing here, that politicians will change their behavior if there's a reason for them to, and there's no reason for them to.
Yeah, I mean, I think the repercussions from, deploying a disinformation campaign is almost non-existent. I mean, most of the deterrence relies on the platforms themselves taking down, for example, networks. So you kind of lose the time and the effort in building out that network. But politically, I mean, often those campaigns just come and go because you can do them in a clandestine fashion. So nobody knows who's actually running it. Nobody knows who's funding or paying for this network. If it does get discovered, the network gets taken down and nothing comes of it. You kind of need somebody that's able to, piece together why this network was set up in the first place. What was the objectives of these individuals, of this network that was set out? Because once you can start determining what the objectives were, you can start looking at who'd benefit from that. And then to your point about it being, mostly adversarial, kind of targeting someone else, bringing them down, that's effective for the same reason, because any number of people could have targeted that group, that individual, that party for any number of reasons. Whereas if it's a more positive type of disinformation campaign, we're trying to build up your own image, or you're trying to massage some scandal for yourself, that's often very easy to pick up, because you can very clearly see who benefits from that narrative that's being propagated by that network.
It's very interesting to watch it all play out, and I sometimes wonder if this is going to change. I'm going to open the floor to questions in just a moment, and we'll give you a non-working microphone if you've got some questions for us. But before I do that, Lisa, around the world, I mean, there must be all kinds of attempts. You speak to the Brazilian model, but this is a global thing. I mean, I know the United Nations looks at these kinds of issues as well. And unfortunately, there are also actors out there who are what I would call non-democratic actors. So in other words, it's not clear that the majority of the world's, or the people who lead the majority of the world's population actually want an end to disinformation. In other words, this tsunami, no matter what we do, is going to get worse and worse.
So I understand what you're saying. And I think that it's absolutely true that we have very powerful adversaries to democratic governance that are very actively looking to seed and amplify a lot of the discontent and narratives that are the most problematic ones that we're looking at. But at the same time, to expand on something that I was talking about earlier in terms of what is the antidote to this or the counter narrative to this. And I do feel like when we look at this space, it's easy to get caught up at let us map and point out and focus all of our attention on the bad actors and say this isn't fair and it's impacting our systems. And all of those things are true. But when it comes to your average voter or your average citizen, that's not a compelling narrative for why you should embrace the alternative. And I do sometimes worry that when we think about the challenges of the information space by overly biasing ourselves to let us explore and map the depths of the doom and gloom, as opposed to at the same time, how are we building a positive, credible alternative that we are communicating? And I think that that can be the difference in a messaging strategy of, the difference between don't embrace this message. This is problematic for X, Y, and Z reason. It's not particularly resonant versus sort of the emotional appeal that you can make on the other side, the benefits of civic engagement, communal engagement, of participatory human rights respecting frameworks. And I think that we need to be on the offense to some degree because we're never going to win if we're constantly playing defense. And I think we need to think about what does that offense look like.
Very interesting point. All right, some questions from the floor, please. I'm sure there'll be someone who will have a question or two, something that's been brought up by our panel, and just a contribution perhaps that you may want to make on the issue of online harms that we've been talking. I can see a hand over there in the green shirt. I can see one at the back as well. Is anyone in charge of the microphones? There we are. There was a hand over there. Yes, sir. Good evening. And just your name, please, to start.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I'm GB Moses, an AU fellow from South Sudan, and I'm a fact checker. So my question will go to the Electoral Commission Chairman. In your introductory message, you told us we can't fight misinformation completely during election process, but what we can do, we can minimize. But given elections in Africa, especially Kenya and Nigeria, and the current one in Liberia, we see that the role of fighting misinformation is left to fact checkers. So the question now is, which measures have you put across, or which measures are you planning to put across to fight misinformation during elections?
Okay. No, thank you very much. I think it's the duty of the Electoral Commission in terms of its own inherent mandate, acting together with other partners in society. Mitigate the impact of misinformation. I don't think it is correct to leave it fact checkers only. I do believe that as have an inherent obligation to put it. In fact, there is a process, a continental process, which we are intimately set up guidelines for these to manage social media. And we hope that all election management bodies on the continent will begin to do something in managing disinformation. Those guidelines are clear. They are not, it's not a formal protocol of the EU, for instance, but it gives you some kind of suggestions as to what ought to be in place ahead of an election to try to manage social media. So those guidelines, they apply to election management bodies, platforms, regulators, and the like, and the like, and the like. It is our hope that once adopted, which is due at the next meeting or the General Assembly of the Association of African Electoral Authorities in Benin, Cotonou, that they can fuse to be a formal protocol of the AU, because the AU is also involved. But I think it's something a little bit far in the future.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Steve, if I can maybe jump in there as well. I mean, in South Africa, we don't have a specific entity or an organization that looks at disinformation specifically. I think similar to your situation, it's up to the media and up to fact-checking organizations to kind of pick up that slack when it comes around. Whenever there's something that needs to be debunked, it falls on the shoulders of the fact-checking organizations, and they've got their own challenges. You know, they struggle to find funding, they struggle to find core funding. It's often project-based, so you know it'll run for a while, but after the elections, it stops again. So what I'd like to see is an organization or an entity, perhaps vested in one of the Chapter 9s, that focuses on misinformation and disinformation, not just during election cycles, because election cycles is when it's almost pushed to a focal point, but throughout the rest of the time as well. Disinformation is a constant. It's happening throughout. People are exposed to it on a constant basis. And having an entity or an organization, that's vested and that's got a specific mandate to, either to uphold human rights or to uphold the elections, to have a body vested in that's able to take this issue and address it all year round is something that I'd probably like to see.
Yeah. So in other words, consistency. Does make sense. There was a hand at the back. Yes, sir. Sorry.
Over here. Thanks. Sean Muller, I'm an academic. I just want to read you very briefly a couple of paragraphs I wrote in an op-ed earlier this year. I wasn't invited back to write another one, which is fine. Much reporting focuses on potential meddling by Russia, which is plausible though unproven. But it would be naive and ahistorical to ignore the potential for interference by Western countries, not least when many important South African civil society actors currently rely on funding from institutions in Germany, the United States, the United Kingdom, and so on, which is kind of relevant given the funding of the current event. Sovereignty means being fundamentally independent of any foreign influence, not only the countries you may dislike. I do not have a great deal of faith in any of our institutions, whether the State Security Agency, the Electoral Commission of South Africa, or indeed the largest media groups, including the SABC, to protect South African democracy from such interference. Now, so I wrote that long before this event, right? But what I'd like to draw attention to here is that there's a little bit of naivety in terms of how misinformation, disinformation works. Because one of the things that hasn't been spoken about is amplification and de-amplification. You don't have to create content. What you need to be able to do is control the platform so you decide what people see. The content can be true, right? But you'll make sure that people see true content that's positive about some parties and see lots of negative content about other parties, right? But you make sure that the obverse is not the case. And unfortunately, in the local narrative, we are imitating the international narrative, which focuses on actors like Russia and China, which may well have malevolent intentions. But what we know is that the greatest cyber power in the world is the United States. And we also know that the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Lab is funded by the US Department of Defense. So John's work back in with the Gupta bots was excellent. I thought it was really good and I learned a lot from that. But what I'm not seeing in the South African context is a clear-eyed realism about the countries that would want, because primarily it's state powers, about the state powers that would want to meddle in South African elections. Okay, and so yes, it would be great if we had a Chapter 9 institution that was responsible for that. But I think we need to be very clear that we can't just regurgitate this narrative with all due respect, from the Atlantic Council and other organizations, because they are biased. Because if those states were interfering in South African democracy, you can be sure that those labs would not be detecting what's going on. And all the evidence indicates, and this is the last thing I'll say, objectively, that the countries that have the most control over these platforms, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Meta and so forth, is the United States.
And they start with immense cultural power, Jean Leroux.
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point. I mean, there is an overwhelming bias on Russia and China specifically. To a lesser extent, Iran and Turkey is also in the crosshairs because of that. But a lot of it also comes down to funding. The funding that comes through to organizations like ours, to a lot of civil society organizations that are very project focused. And unfortunately, the US funders, their focus is Russia, their focus is China. That's not to say that they aren't involved in it. I mean, I specifically include a couple of examples of Western powers meddling in African scenarios in some of the trainings that we do. A very good example was in France, I think about 2 or 3 years back, where they meddled in Central African Republic. There was actually almost this patrol combat between 2 different networks, one Russian and one French, in Central African Republic, basically trying to manipulate the perceptions of people there. Just last year, the US was kind of caught out in the Middle East, where they were using, for lack of a better word, old sock puppet accounts of theirs to try and manipulate discussions in the Middle East. And I mean, as far as you're saying about us receiving funding from the Department of Defense, that's true. But internally, we've got editorial mechanisms in place to maintain that type of independence. And that's something that we put a lot of value in, because at the end of the day, similar to what the traditional media has, our credibility is at stake. If we only report on one side of the conversation, or only report on narratives that focuses on one part, and specifically a Western focus, that does our credibility no good. And for me personally, as a South African, it does me no good as well. I'd want to see, South Africa and the larger African region have its voice of its own. Stephen, you mentioned earlier this conference that I attended in Poland last week. One of the things that struck out there was the fact that in that entire conversation, Africa was not mentioned. Africa did not have a voice. And this is despite the fact that the platforms, the people, the individuals who were there, even the legislation that was being discussed and passed through the EU Parliament is something that affects people in Africa directly. The platforms operate here, but they don't have a presence here. I mean, we had a specific example where we were trying to obtain information on an account spreading hate speech on Twitter. The Human Rights Commission approached Twitter and said, we want to get the details of this account. We want to take the individual to the Equality Court. And about a week later, they came back and said, sorry, we looked at the account and we don't consider that hate speech. So in essence, what you had was a Chapter 9 organization in South Africa focusing on hate speech, focusing on, freedom of expression and what you can say and cannot say. We've got an extensive amount of jurisprudence around what constitutes hate speech. And somebody based in, I think, Ireland or Silicon Valley decided that their principles and their guidelines, their view of freedom of expression trumps one of our Chapter 9 organizations. So it's a very good point that you raise. It's one of the reasons why I want to see more homegrown initiatives, more homegrown institutions that can position South Africa and more broadly Africa in these conversations in a way that's got meaning, that's got impact, and that can actually make a difference.
Nomshara, would you like to respond? I caution you that you're speaking under a banner that says Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany.
I think for me, I just want to focus on the beginning part of your input and question around amplification. And I think one of the things that we never highlight, number one, I think 2 things rather, is one, disinformation thrives in a very vulnerable environment. And I think we've seen many cases such as that in South Africa. But second to that is the psychological impact that it also has. And the fact that anxiety and fear, confusion, and lack of understanding of systems or issues or any sort of critical societal issue that's happening at that current point can push an individual to go in any direction. But when you say amplification, this is technology as well. It's using AI technology. It's using bots and botnets. If you had to go to any part of South Africa, especially in a section or an area that is not connected, is not, advanced when it comes to literacy, and say, do you understand that there's such a thing as botnets? That if I go on Twitter and I start seeing 15 accounts spreading the same narrative, that is actually one person behind all of those accounts. They wouldn't even understand what you mean. Because the understanding for them is that I'm seeing different people and different profiles speaking of the same thing and supporting the same narrative. So for me, it goes back to a citizen. So we can come up with the most sophisticated innovations, but if an individual doesn't know how to use it, how to navigate it, and the impact of it and the dangers of it, then it's as good as us saying that the impact of it is behind sharing. If I created a disinformation narrative and nobody engaged with it and nobody shared it, its impact dies there. Its amplification dies there as well. So at the same time, and going back to what John was saying, is we might try to advance these discussions in such a way that we always speak about them in high level and we'll shake our heads and speak policy and speak regulation. But at the end of the day, we're speaking to society at the end of the day. Those are the ones that are going to cast that vote. But if they don't understand the ecosystem that they are engaging in, if they don't understand the digital realm that they're engaging in, how do we expect ourselves to ensure that we're countering disinformation in different levels?
Other questions we have at the front row. Isaac Mino.
Not a question, actually, it's a remark.
Sorry, I can't see you.
But
Oh, there you
I'm
are. Yes,
short.
go for it.
Anyway, guys,
And
I
your name, please.
Ulindiwe Mabena. So my thing is, I think we have a problem of integrity within our institutions in South Africa and the media at large. And I think my academic, colleague here has been trying to highlight that from yesterday. My point is, I don't believe that we need more institutions that would actually be carrying and trying to educate people about whatever. While yes, literacy is important, but I think more than anything, South Africans, we just need to go back to the basics. South Africans has lost trust in the media and every other public institution, mainly because they have not, well, that's the perception, been seen to be conducting themselves in an ethical and, with integrity. What I think we should be doing is, of course, to build trust, it takes time. It's not an overnight thing. So we need to be consistent and relentless in pursuing the truth and facts, but also we need to be seen by the public, not to be biased. We have a problem in South Africa today. When people tune into the SABC or to Newsroom Africa or to ENCA, or they go to the digital side, they know what to expect. They know if you guys will go after either Mashatile but when it's Steenhuisen or whatever else, people will be mute. That's the problem we need to tackle as well as South Africans. That how then do we build ourselves? And do we earn the public's trust for them to see us as actually, we are truly the watchdogs of society. We are interested, and all we are interested in is to holding to account everything and everyone that is actually being seen to be wanting until we establish the facts. And I think that's where we're at the moment, honestly. And when it comes to elections, then it means even when we are trying to deal with the avalanche of that disinformation, people would be thinking twice and be like, because our audiences are not stupid, guys. I mean, I'm speaking from perspective of a person that was raised from a person that was illiterate, but the lessons I got were invaluable, so they're able to step back and think, but why are they saying this? I'm going to go back to IOL or News 24 or to whatever and check if it's really true. But the thing is, we have not been honorable and ethical, in our own professions. That is why people, now are doubting us. The IEC, for instance, the last elections we've had, people saw ballot papers, like lots of ballot that were being disposed. And people were asking questions, what's going on? Like, should we trust these people? We need to conduct ourselves better and build this thing over time. And then that's when South Africans, I believe, will come back and really believe in us. Sorry.
Okay, I mean, look, the IEC can answer for itself if it chooses to, but as far as I know, there's no credible evidence of ballot papers that were not counted. And in terms of the media, different people in the media, and I'm going to respond to you as I suppose, a representative of the media in a way with no mandate, is simply to say, try it. You see what happens when you go on air and talk about the Middle East in one way or another when no one knows what the facts are, and see what happens. Trying, and when you go on air and you talk about, people demand that you immediately say this person is sexist or racist when you don't know the facts. I hear you. I think you make very many valid points, but I think there's also a response from the media. I'll shut up there using my platform. Isaac Mina, hello.
Thank you. I hope the mic comes on. So Jean, I would like to address the issue that you raised about the need for a content regulator as part of the Chapter 9 institution. Are you really asking for statutory content regulator? I think we should be careful for what we wish. And I also think that the South African Human Rights Commission earlier this year released what they call a social media charter, which is a document that was widely, where civil society, all kinds of players were widely consulted. So that is a charter that is based on a digital literacy approach. So it deals with anything from harmful expression, disinformation, information, and so on. Many issues that people struggle with on a regular basis. But what it says then, it gives guidelines on how to deal with that if you find those things online. And secondly, it gives you an idea of what kind of existing legislation you can use. Regulatory power, statutory power.
Yeah, I think maybe to just clarify, like I'm equally opposed against the content regulator. I don't think we need to have a government institution telling us what we can and should not post. I think it's more a case of having an entity that can deal with issues like digital literacy. That particular document from the Human Rights Commission that you mentioned, I assisted in drafting that. I provided the section on disinformation, and it's got a lot of tools and practical tools to assist people to know what they can do in the event that they are targeted or they come across any of these things. So that was more the type of thing that I have in mind. We've got a Chapter 9 institution, for example, the Human Rights Commission, where they've got a mandate that's vested in the preservation and the proliferation of human rights. And within that, you can position something where you've got a focus on digital literacy in the behaviors, the spreading and the amplification of disinformation, not on the content side, because once you start trading into content, because once you start getting to the content side, then it becomes issues of censorship. I think as Sean mentioned now earlier, it doesn't matter whether the content is true or false. If it's being spread with an ulterior motive, it amounts to propaganda. So trying to regulate and moderate the content and having a government institution in charge of that is very dangerous territory. I would not be in support of that at all. But it's more of having a central, an organization, an institution that's vested with the powers to, take action, that's got funding to be able to train individuals, to train people to look at these things and capacitate and do these digital literacy campaigns that we so sorely need.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up in a minute. Ayanda.
Why are you giving me a minute? Can everyone hear me? I'm going to project my voice for you. Okay, can everyone hear me now? All right, I'm just going to go on. My name is Alice. I have a question and I also have a comment. So Nomshaka said something that really struck a chord with me about online spaces and the use of language. And so I was looking at the tools in which we have that Video 411 has on here. And I asked this question at the launch of the Video 411. That's day I asked this question again. When are different languages going to be incorporated? Still, okay, cool, now it is working. When will different languages be incorporated into the tools that are available online for people to report and for people to maybe assist, especially when it comes to things like the advertising that we're seeing online from political parties? I understand that these tools are developed and the online space is written in English, but I think that it's very dangerous for us to not talk about how the digital divide online and offline hurts people because of the fact that there is such a huge language divide, especially when it comes into the way that we are consuming and reading and writing news. Online right now in the SABC, it is extremely difficult to access articles that are written in isiZulu, in different languages, you know, especially when it comes to people, sign language, for example, and also assisting the blind. And there is a digital divide and a gap of information there just in general. So how is it then, are you going to tackle disinformation and misinformation if people who are disabled, people who cannot speak English are left off of these platforms as well? So I know that the Real 411, there are some reports, I mean, not reporters, sorry, there are some fact checkers who can who can check facts in Afrikaans and some, I think, in Zulu. I know I can, but you know, there is something to that, because a couple of years ago in KwaMashu, there was a WhatsApp message that was making the rounds in the community saying that, and I use this term very loosely, saying that foreign nationals are going to be kidnapping children, so protect your kids. And what the children did was they took to the streets. I think this happened around 2012 or 2013. But this is where the power of offline misinformation and disinformation takes place. And that WhatsApp message was written in isiZulu, and people understood exactly what that meant. And so coming then to young children and the youth, when we are then engaging with these young kids, are we engaging with them in a language and in a way that they understand when it comes to digital literacy and media literacy before we even speak about civic education, sir? Before we even get to civic education, is that kind of education happening in a language that children can understand, in a way that they can access that information in a way that has less jargon, so that they can start to build that trust with the institutions, start to build that trust with the media? Because also with the SABC and having the platform for kids news, which is great, you know, it's a great platform, but at the same time, that platform only has access to a certain amount of children. Information only comes at the SABC to certain amounts of people. Parliament TV is not access to everybody, and that is done by design. So what is government doing to make sure that people have access to this information and to meet people where they are, instead of this top-down approach that we're having from the Embassy of Germany, from SABC, from Media Monitoring Africa, from the Media Development and Diversity Agency, that is looking down and shining down this information upon us instead of actually meeting people where they are? Are you working with youth engagement and with youth organizations such as Youth Lab, Engage SA, where they are talking to high school students about misinformation and disinformation and how it affects elections? What is being done that is in a robust way outside of the English language and outside of using embassies that don't have a top-down approach?
Okay.
What's going on?
Ayala, thank you. I think we've heard. Shadow Sai.
Well, yes, the issues pertaining to civic education that the speaker raises. As we speak, we have close to 5,000 officers on the ground engaging with communities about civic education in the languages which people speak in particular contexts. So that level of public engagement is already happening. We are launching the elections on the 24th of October with the supporting communication campaign, which will be in all official languages, from isiZulu right through to Afrikaans. Oh, I thought you were rebuffing the use of official languages. But what is important is for you to realize that when you operate in a fiscally constrained environment, you've got to use your penny for maximum effect. And radio is the medium through which a majority of South Africans receive their news and information. Hence, we will have both communication messages as well as voter education content on radio in all official languages. I could have gone into other things, but I think in respecting time, I'll leave it at that.
We are going to wrap it up in a minute. Nomshara.
I'm going to try, but I think I want to touch on the children aspect. I think I say this with pride, and I have a colleague there who heads our children's projects. MMA has been at the heart of empowering children and putting them at the center when it comes to ensuring that they have a voice. So we don't go top, we go bottom up, we empower them. These are young children, I wish you were here day one, who can speak, thank you, who can speak to policy issues, critical issues that they face, who actually even hold media to account to say that, hey, we are here. You're reporting about us, but we also have a say in this issue. Second to that, we have another course called Reporting on Children in the Media. This is also to sensitize and empower media in understanding how do I engage with children? How do I report on children? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I can even invite my colleague to speak a bit more on that. But that actually also goes back to mis and disinformation. We have our third comic book that was created, developed by young people, telling the narrative of mis and disinformation in their language, in their setting, in their understanding. This was not created by anyone but them. And this is also showing how they understand what they're dealing with, but they're also telling us this is how we are facing it as young children, and also speaking to their peers. So it's a peer-to-peer empowerment as well. Going back to Real 411, I think the one aspect of the platform itself is me as an individual being able to submit a complaint in any official language that I see. The system itself has the capacity and the capabilities to deal with a complaint from any single official South African language. And that was done on the basis and understanding that disinformation is not an English problem. Right? It comes in different languages, in different narratives, in different dialects as well. So we can say it's Zulu, right? But we know very well that the dialects are different. And that's why also the platform is there. And behind that, we've got amazing reviewers. It's a vast network of reviewers who are coming with that experience at the same time. And we also collaborate with institutions that can assist in that regard as well. So at the end of the day, and I think I myself as a panelist today, I've been emphasizing that at the heart of every innovation that we create at MMA is the understanding that when we are saying we're protecting our democracy, when we are saying we're having a human rights-based approach, is not for us or anybody at the top, but it's about those at the bottom, because that is the society at hand. I'll stop there because, yeah.
I'm very worried about Lisa, and I'm worried, Lisa, that we've neglected you a little bit. And I know we've been seeing a perfect demonstration here of the power of talk radio, but I wonder if you have some thoughts of everything that you've been hearing.
No, I've really appreciated the direction that this Q&A has gone, and I've learned a lot from it. Just harkening back to a question a few moments ago, just thinking about, I recognize that I'm an American voice in this conversation and the skepticism that might bring with it. But I do want to say it's, as I've engaged with these conversations globally, sort of Americans, and certainly myself, coming to this conversation as one of the family of democracies that is dealing with this broader set of issues in ways that we certainly don't have solutions for. So not coming with the voice of we've got this solved, but we all need to link arms together and figure this out if a world order based in human rights and rule of law is a value set that we share. And so have really appreciated learning more about the evolution of 411 and Padre, which are both systems that I've talked about with international audiences and held up as really innovative examples in a space when everyone was looking for solutions. So thanks for this opportunity to listen today, and it's been a pleasure.
All right, thank you very much. There's one last question at the back. Hello, good evening. Just talk, it'll pick you up.
MMA, I think what it's trying to do with the comic book, at the launch of the comic book, we are about to launch our third one, is that it can happen with the participation of children. And so I think it's a very unfair point to say that it's a top down. I was very hurt by that. We at all costs, we try to make it, we center it on the people that we are offering the service to at every single point, at every single point.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your adding additions to the conversation tonight. And thank you for listening, because, you know, not everybody listens. I don't know if it's just me. Lisa Reppel, thank you for your contribution and the online work you do around the world. Nomshado and Kosenkulu is the communications manager for Media Monitoring Africa. Jean Leroux, you may not see his work overtly, but you will feel over time. Simon Mabolo is the CEO of the Electoral Officer. Put up your hand if you're not going to vote next year. Yeah. You have to do it. Oh, yeah. You spoil your ballot. You have to go and vote. Very important. Of course, don't forget, tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, leading the conversation, 105.1 on SFM. Thank you very much.
Just say to me, I'm just going to on the mark and then. Good evening, everyone. I think that was an absolutely fantastic panel. Can we give everyone another round of applause? Thank you. And thank you to Stephen for making time to come and facilitate. Please bear with me. I'm going to wrap up our formalities this evening. I do have a few short remarks to make. I would like to take a quick moment to just recognize someone particularly special to MMA in the room, Edward Bird. Can you raise your hand? Welcome this evening, all the way from the UK. Why am I echoing? All the way from the UK, who was around at the very, very beginning of MMA, who was one of MMA's directors before William. He wasn't always director, if you can believe that. So welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. I would then like to, I think, just say that, you know, one of the things that stood out for me this evening is that, and all the discussions that we have, is our elections is going to be won or lost online. And I think that this is just the start of a number of very important discussions, very important workshops, and initiatives that are going to be run over the next couple of months. And so it's just the beginning. So thank you all for making time to come out and for your thought-provoking questions, your participation, and active listening. Without you, this would not be possible. So thank you for that as well. I would like to then just promote our last day for Media Freedom Festival tomorrow.
It's going to be a fantastic day where we start off the morning, I think at 9 o'clock with a workshop, a masterclass on understanding hate speech and spotting hate speech, which is something that I think is very close to the work that we do and so important for the space that we find ourselves in. Following that, we are going to have a bit of a game show style session where we're going to rate the hate. And that we always have, I mean, it's not a topic you have fun with, but the sessions are really exciting and entertaining. So please come along to that. That's following the workshop directly after the morning session. We then close off with our last evening session tomorrow on blowing the whistle. And would you blow the whistle? Another sort of game show type session where we unpack issues around whistleblowing and some of the challenges and the ethical dilemmas around blowing the whistle. So please, we do have more space for I keep looking at Nomshado because she's been one of the fantastic people behind the scenes. So I'm making sure I'm getting all these details correct. So that's we still have space. Please join us if you can. And then lastly, I would also like to thank our partners and our funders. The issue of funding has come up this evening, and so I would like to thank MDDA, SABC, and the German Embassy. Media Monitoring Africa is always very transparent and open about who we have as our funders. We have both local and international donors, none of which have direct influence over the work that we do and the platforms that we run. And I will happily chat to anyone about that afterwards as well. And with that, I would like to close the session. We do have some dinner waiting outside for us. Please join us for some food and some drinks. We'd love to keep the conversation that we've had started this evening going. So thank you very much.